TayK opened the door and shot him.
Interview. A legal letter arrived at Buckingham Palace. The king read it. Then the palace went very quiet. A sitting king of England has just received a legal letter from his younger brother's lawyers, and he cannot dismiss it. The Edinburgh Dukedom is one of the oldest titles in the British royal family. It has been created 4 times. It has been held by princes, by a naval officer who married a queen, and now by the quietest man in the Windsor family tree. But here is what nobody at the palace stopped to check. A royal title is not a ribbon pinned to a chest. It is a legal instrument. What it says in writing. What it creates in law. And the 1947 letters patent that established Philip's dukedom, the documents that have sat in the National Archives for 75 years, contain specific provisions attached to the title itself. Those provisions did not dissolve when Philip died. They entered a legal state called abeyance, existing but without a holder. And when Queen Elizabeth stood at the Platinum Jubilee in June 2022 and formally conferred the dukedom on Edward, those provisions reattached to the title to Edward. In the months that followed, King Charles made significant, high-value decisions about the private royal estates, Sandringham, Balmoral, assets conservatively valued in the tens of millions of pounds. He moved with the efficiency of a new reign. He did not check what Edward's title legally contained. The palace assumed it knew. It did not. Before I tell you what is in those documents, and there is a specific legal phrase in there that changes every assumption you have about how royal property works, I need you to understand the one thing about Edward that the palace always got wrong.
They opened the door and shot.
Avatar. He tried the Marines in 1987, left after 4 months. The press noticed, wrote the obvious story, weakness, failure, not built for it, and then moved on. There were bigger fires. Charles and Diana were already burning. Andrew was accumulating headlines of his own. Edward went quiet, and the tabloids let him. He set up a small television production company. It struggled. Nobody was particularly surprised. He married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, a warm ceremony, understated, not a spectacle. The public liked her. The press found them manageable. And Edward kept showing up. Every engagement, every speech, every appearance the institution required of him, delivered without complaint and without drama. 30 years of performing forgettable. 30 years of being the one the camera panned past on the balcony. But here is the thing about being the one nobody watches. You get to see everything. Every miscalculation, every cost of chasing headlines, every price the others paid for being interesting. Edward watched all of it, and he stayed exactly where he was. That is not weakness. That is a position. On June 5, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II stood before her family and the watching world at the Platinum Jubilee and formally conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on her youngest son. The palace used a specific word in its announcement. Not granted, not bestowed, conferred. A word with legal weight, the deliberate transfer of something real from one hand to another.
Brenna Reyes in tears and in her own words described to jurors how a day that started as a planned photo shoot turned deadly. Reyes says at the time Tamar McIntyre referred to her as his girlfriend and had asked for help in finding a photographer. She knew Mark Saldivar through Instagram and reached out to him for his help. She picked him up along with McIntyre and his friends Jalen Bell and Jeremiah Rodriguez, all in the same car. Saldivar asked if he could reschedule and if they could give him a ride to North Star Mall, which she agreed. But then she says everything.
The room read it as sentiment. A woman in the final year of her life, visibly frail, giving her youngest son a piece of his father. Philip had carried that title for 73 years. It was the title he had been given the day before he married her. Passing it to Edward felt like the closing of a circle, emotional, symbolic, the kind of gesture a dying mother makes. But Elizabeth had not survived 70 years on the throne by making purely symbolic gestures. She had read more legal documents than most judges. She understood, with absolute precision, what a letter's patent contains and what it does not. She knew the difference between a ceremonial title and a legal instrument. And she knew that the 1947 documents, the ones drafted for Philip before the ink was dry on their marriage certificate, contained provisions that had been sitting in the National Archives unexamined for 3/4 of a century. She looked at her youngest son. She made a decision, and then she signed. Philip died on April 9th, 2021 at Windsor Castle. He was 99 years old. The palace issued its statement that morning, formal, measured, the language of an institution that had been preparing for this moment for years. And the moment he died, the Edinburgh dukedom entered abeyance. A legal status. The title exists, but has no holder.
The light at McCullough, and Tamar took out his gun and pointed it at Mark and asked for his bag. Mark refused to give him the bag, so they all started hitting.
It sits. It waits. The palace's assumption, in that waiting period, was the assumption every institution makes when it has held documents for 75 years without reading them carefully. The provisions were personal. They belonged to Philip. They died with him. The lawyer's argument is that this assumption was wrong. In English property law, a charge or encumbrance does not attach to the holder of a title. It attaches to the title itself. It does not dissolve when the holder dies. It follows the dukedom wherever the dukedom goes, into abeyance, and back out again when a new holder receives it. The palace had the 1947 documents. It had always had them. What it did not have, what it had never needed until now, was a reason to read them as something other than history. When Edward received the title in June 2022, the provisions came with it, quietly, in writing, exactly where his mother had known they would be. Avatar. 5 people carry this story. You need to know exactly who they are before it gets complicated. Edward is the protagonist. Not the loudest man in the room, the most patient one. 30 years of deliberate invisibility that was not absence. He held his position, kept his counsel, and waited. He is holding the documents now. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, stands alongside him. She has never sought tabloid oxygen. She knows what is in the papers.
Applaud him and gave him a high five, and they high-fived each other, and Jalen said, "You caught your first."
When the King's health began to fail in early 2024 and the Princess of Wales stepped back, Sophie quietly doubled her public workload. 37 engagements in September 2024 alone compared to 18 the year before. She described herself once as a secret weapon. She was not wrong. King Charles is not a villain. He is an institution man making institutional decisions at speed, under pressure, while managing a serious cancer diagnosis. He moved fast on succession because that is what new reigns require. The question this story asks is not whether he acted from malice. It is whether he read the fine print before he acted. Queen Elizabeth II is the architect. She is absent from every scene that follows, and present in all of them. Every legal provision in this story traces back to a decision she made deliberately, in writing, before she died. And Philip is the foundation. The 1947 letters patent were drafted for him. What they said then is what makes this story now. Interview. The Queen did not give Edward the Edinburgh title because he was next in line for it. She gave it to him because she chose to. That distinction matters. Philip died in April 2021. The title entered abeyance. Charles, as the eldest son, inherited the dukedom automatically under the 1947 letters patent. He became the second Duke of Edinburgh the morning his father died. He held it for 17 months, and when he became king in September 2022, The title merged with the crown and ceased to exist until someone recreated it. Nobody was obligated to recreate it for Edward.
He likes the contact, he likes the tactical stuff, he's very intelligent. He's very smart, he's very articulate. I don't know what people or what social media think of him, but he's a smart kid. If he was able to do that at 14, 15, imagine now, Imagine. So if you take that time capsule away and that never happened, how far would he be right now in the music industry? He came out with the Playboy Cardis, the XXXTentacions. He was the leader of that SoundCloud. So imagine now what he'll be probably.
Charles could have let it sit. Reports from July 2021 suggested he was considering exactly that. One source telling the Sunday Times that Edinburgh won't go to them as far as the prince is concerned. The title could have been quietly retired. A clean administrative decision, the kind new reigns are full of. Instead, 3 months after becoming king, Charles conferred it on his youngest brother. And 2 months before that, at the Platinum Jubilee, Elizabeth had made her own position visible, standing Edward and Sophie beside her, making the gift public, making the intention clear. The press read the Jubilee moment as a mother's sentiment. What it actually was, the deliberate transfer of a legal instrument from a woman who knew exactly what legal instruments contain. The press did not cover. Nobody thought to ask what was inside the documents. The palace certainly didn't. On September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral. Charles became king before the announcement was made. That is how succession works. Instantaneous, automatic, no ceremony required. One moment a prince, the next a king. And a new reign moves fast. It has to. The machinery of the monarchy does not pause for grief. Within weeks, Charles was managing the consolidation of a royal portfolio that had been built across 70 years of his mother's reign.
Says she was in fear to reach out to police after the shooting because she says McIntyre threatened to kill her and her family. As for the backpack with Saldivar's thing, she said that Bell and McIntyre took off with it. Reyes was offered a plea deal in exchange for her testimony for 10 years probation on the lesser charge of tampering with evidence, which the defense says is a big reason why she said what she said.
Sandringham, Balmoral, the income streams attached to both, the satellite properties, the estate planning decisions that a new monarch inherits along with the crown. He moved with efficiency. That is not a criticism, it is a description. Every monarch who has ever inherited a functioning institution has done exactly the same thing. You assess, you reorganize, you make decisions at speed because the institution requires it. What Charles did not do, what nobody in the palace did in those weeks of urgent consolidation, was pull out the 1947 letters patent and read them carefully. The documents had been sitting in the National Archives for 75 years. They were history. They were background. They were not, as far as the palace was concerned, a live legal question. That assumption was about to become very expensive. Here is what I need you to answer. When Charles moved to consolidate those estates, do you think he knew about the provisions and hoped no one would check? Or do you think the palace genuinely missed this? Comment right now, because the answer changes what this story actually is. Interview. By late 2023, something had shifted in the visible relationship between the two brothers. It was not dramatic. There was no public falling out, no briefings to sympathetic journalists, no pointed absences at major ceremonies.
And I mean, this, like I said, there's no hit to anybody else, but he'll probably be leading a young school like NBA Youngboy, probably way above that situation. Lil Durk, probably with young Lil Baby, all them, he'll be up there with them. You know what I'm saying? Because I saw his talent. I hear his music. I hear his unreleased. I talk to him. He reads. He's getting into a mode of more maturity. So it's like, I just, I pray for him every day, and I pray for his mentor, and I pray for my sister. So, one day they...
Edward and Sophie kept their schedules. They showed up. They always showed up. But people who watch this institution closely, who read the joint engagement calendars, who notice when two brothers who have always managed to get along suddenly manage to get along from a greater distance, noticed. Fewer shared appearances, a cooler atmosphere in the interactions that did happen. The kind of change that is impossible to prove and impossible to miss if you know what the baseline looks like. The palace said nothing. No statement touching Edward's financial position. No briefing to trusted royal correspondents about the state of the brothers' relationship. Royal commentator Emma Mackenzie wrote for the Belfast Telegraph that the Edinburghs had become two of the firm's most crucial players: steady, hard-working, indispensable. The public profile was warm. The private atmosphere was something else. Institutions dismiss the claims they can beat. They brief against the people they can afford to brief against. What they do not do, what no institution does when it is confident, is go quiet. The palace went quiet. And that silence was its own kind of answer. The 1947 letters patent are not complicated documents to locate. They are publicly available. The London Gazette published them on November 20th, 1947, issue 38,128, if you want to look them up yourself. The National Archives holds the originals. They have been accessible for 3/4 of a century. What they contain, the specific provisions about what the Edinburgh Dukedom carries, what attaches to the title, what follows it, is the legal core of this story. And the argument Edward's lawyers are making depends on a distinction that English property law has been clear about for a very long time. Balmoral and Sandringham are not Crown Estate. That matters. The Crown Estate is managed by the government, returned to public finances, subject to parliamentary oversight. Balmoral and Sandringham are private property, owned by the monarch personally, inherited outside the Crown Estate framework, subject to ordinary English property law. The same law that governs encumbrances on a terraced house in Leeds governs encumbrances on a Highland estate worth north of £100 million. And in English property law, a charge or encumbrance does not belong to the person holding a title. It belongs to the title itself. It follows. When Philip died and the dukedom entered abeyance, the provisions did not dissolve, they waited. When Edward received the title, they came with it, quietly, in writing, exactly where they had always been. The reversionary interest argument is the legal heart of this story, and it is worth being precise about what it does and does not claim. Nobody is arguing that Edward owns Sandringham outright. Nobody is arguing that he can walk through the gates of Balmoral and present a deed of title. What the lawyers are apparently arguing, and this is important to state clearly, is that specific provisions within the 1947 letters patent give the holder of the Edinburgh Dukedom documented legal rights over specific interests within those estates. Income streams, management decisions. The kind of rights that, in ordinary English property law, a holder of an encumbrance can enforce against an owner who acts as though the encumbrance does not exist. Conservative valuations put Sandringham somewhere between £50 and £200 million. Balmoral north of £100 million. The specific monetary value of whatever Edward's lawyers are claiming is not confirmed, and Agent 3 will not pretend otherwise. But in property law, the size of the right and the size of the asset are separate questions. A documented legal right is worth defending regardless of its face value. And Charles made significant management decisions about both estates, restructuring income streams, making long-term planning choices. In the months after succession, without checking whether the new Duke of Edinburgh had a documented stake in any of it. The provisions were there. They had always been there. The palace simply assumed they weren't. Before I show you what those documents mean, and what it means that the palace went quiet, I need you to answer one question first. Do you think Edward is doing this for the money, or for something else entirely? Comment now. Your answer matters for what comes next. In late 2023, a formal legal communication arrived at Buckingham Palace from Edward's lawyers. The palace did not dismiss it. That is the detail that matters most in this entire story. Not the provisions, not the valuations, not the 75 years of unread documents. The detail that matters is what the palace did next. It retained external counsel, not the in-house legal team that handles routine royal administrative matters. External counsel, specialists brought in from outside the institution, instructed to conduct an urgent review of the 1947 letters patent and their implications for decisions already made. Back-channel communications opened between the two sides, the kind of quiet, careful negotiation that institutions conduct when they have received a document that has made them uncertain. The palace does not scramble for legal reassurance when it is confident. It does not retain external specialists to urgently review 75-year-old documents when it believes those documents say nothing actionable. It scrambles when someone has handed it a problem it cannot wave away with tradition and precedent. And here is where Track A and Track B become the same story. This was not just a legal letter landing on a palace desk. This was the moment the institution that had spent 30 years looking past Edward, that had assumed his title was ceremonial, his presence decorative, his patience a form of passivity, discovered that the quiet one had been holding something real the entire time. The palace didn't just miss a provision, it walked past a gift a dying mother had left for her son, and now it had to account for it. Interview. The legal question at the center of this story is not complicated to state, it is complicated to answer. And the people best placed to answer it are not palace spokespeople or royal correspondents. They are constitutional scholars who have spent careers studying exactly what letters patent do and do not create. Craig Prescott is a law lecturer who specializes in constitutional law and the monarchy. He has published extensive analysis on the 1917 letters patent, the document that governs who holds royal titles and under what conditions, and has written in detail about how the monarchy's legal architecture functions in practice versus how the institution presents it publicly. He argued successfully that the law should be changed to allow Edward to become a Councillor of State, a change that became the Councillors of State Act 2022. He knows this terrain. Professor Robert Hazel founded the Constitution Unit at University College London. He is a former senior civil servant. He has written that working royals are, in his word, trapped, bound by hereditary principles and the requirement to serve whether they choose it or not. He understands the gap between what the institution says about itself and what its legal instruments actually compel. Professor Vernon Bogdanor, King's College London, Fellow of Brasenose College, Oxford, wrote the definitive academic text on the monarchy and the Constitution in 1995. His central argument is that constitutional monarchy is a system regulated by rules, not just by tradition, not just by convention, but by documents, by what is written down. Their collective verdict on the underlying principle is not in dispute. A king is bound by what documents say. Tradition is not a legal defense against a documented provision. The monarchy's internal decisions about asset management exist within the framework of English property law, and that framework does not make exceptions for the Crown. It never has. Edward's sympathetic moment is the easiest one in this story to state. 30 years of showing up, no defections, no wars with the press, no scandals that required the institution to spend political capital defending him. While the family around him collapsed, repeatedly, publicly, at enormous cost to the Crown, Edward kept his head down and did the work. He was there when the cameras were rolling and there when they weren't. That kind of loyalty, sustained over 3 decades without recognition or reward, is not nothing. It is, in the context of this family, almost vanishingly rare. But here is the part Agent 3 will not skip past. When Edward's lawyers delivered their formal position to Buckingham Palace in late 2023, King Charles was managing a serious cancer diagnosis. The timing of the legal communication, the decision to formalise a property dispute against a brother who was simultaneously dealing with a life-threatening illness and the weight of a new reign, is uncomfortable. There is no framing that makes it otherwise. Edward may have had every legal right to do exactly what he did, The provisions may be entirely real. The claim may be entirely legitimate. None of that changes the fact that his legal team did not wait for Charles to be well. They sent the letter when they sent it. And a man who spent 30 years being defined by his loyalty to the institution chose, at that specific moment, to instruct lawyers rather than make a phone call. That detail sits in the record. It belongs in this story. Charles deserves his sympathetic moment too. It is not a small thing. What he inherited in September 2022. A 70-year reign ending overnight. An institution destabilized by years of internal fracture. Harry and Meghan's departure still raw, Andrew's position unresolved, the press circling. A public that had known only one monarch in living memory, now asked to transfer its loyalty to a man they had watched wait his entire adult life for a role he was never allowed to fully inhabit. And underneath all of it, a body that was already failing him in ways he did not yet know. He moved fast on succession because fast was what the institution required. He consolidated the estate portfolio because that is what every new monarch has done. Because an institution of that scale, with that many moving parts, cannot afford to pause while a king processes his grief. He did not check the 1947 letters patent because nobody had ever needed to check them. They were history. They were settled. The assumption that the re-granting of the Edinburgh title to Edward was honorific was not an unreasonable assumption. It was the assumption every person in that palace would have made, because it was the assumption the palace had always operated on. Charles did not act from malice. He acted from institutional instinct, under impossible pressure, while quietly managing a diagnosis that would have broken most people entirely. And when his youngest brother's lawyers delivered their formal position, Charles's response was to retain external counsel and open back-channel negotiations. Not to pick up the phone, not to sit across a table from Edward as a brother and ask what this was actually about. He treated family as opposing parties. That choice, that specifically institutional response to a human problem, is the thing that condemns him here. Not the efficiency, the distance. Queen Elizabeth II spent 70 years being the most legally precise person in the building. Every document she signed, she understood. Every instrument she created deliberately. The idea that she gave Edward the Edinburgh title without knowing what the 1947 letters patent contained is not a serious proposition. She had read them. She had always read them. She knew. That is her sympathetic moment. And it is a significant one. In the final year of her life, watching the institution she had given everything to absorb fracture after fracture, she looked at her youngest son and made a decision. Not a sentimental one, a legal one. She built something real into the gift. Something that would hold up in writing, long after she was gone, in exactly the circumstances where Edward would need it most. That is not sentiment. That is a mother who understood her institution well enough to protect one child from it. But she sealed her will. She left no public clarity about what she intended the provisions to mean in practice. She left no letter, no statement, no instruction that might have allowed the two sides to understand what she had actually done before lawyers became necessary. Whether that silence was convention, monarchs do not annotate their legal gifts, or choice, it is part of why this dispute exists. The protection was real. The instructions were invisible. Two brothers are now in a legal negotiation that a single conversation, had at the right moment, might have prevented. Some of that falls on her, not most of it, but some. The strongest counter-argument to everything this story has built deserves to be stated clearly. Not dismissed, stated. Letters patent for royal titles have historically granted rights to named individuals. When the individual dies, the rights die with them. The palace's position, and it is not an unreasonable position, is that the 1947 provisions were personal entitlements granted to Philip Mountbatten, a specific man in specific circumstances, and that they dissolved when he did. The re-granting of the Edinburgh title to Edward in 2022 was an honorific act, a son receiving his father's name, not his father's legal estate. On this reading, there is nothing to enforce. There never was, and palace silence on its own proves nothing. Institutions go quiet about sensitive family matters as a matter of routine. The absence of a public briefing on Edward's financial position is not evidence of legal weakness. It is evidence of standard palace communications practice. Silence is not confession. Both of these arguments are real. Neither can be dismissed with a wave of the hand. But here is what cannot be explained away by either of them. The palace retained external counsel. It did not issue a quiet statement saying the claim had no merit. It did not brief trusted royal correspondents, as it routinely does when it wants a narrative managed, that the Edinburgh title carried no actionable provisions. It brought in outside specialists and began an urgent legal review of documents it had held for 75 years. Institutions do not scramble when they are confident. The palace's own response to Edward's lawyers is the most credible corroboration available, not because silence is proof, but because this was not silence. This was movement, careful, urgent, expensive movement. And that is a different thing entirely. Here is where the narrator lands. Not shouting, not celebrating, just stating what the documented picture actually shows. Edward did not outmaneuver his brother. That framing, the quiet schemer, the patient tactician finally springing his trap, is too clean and too convenient. What the record shows is simpler and stranger than that. A woman who understood her institution built something real into a legal document and gave it to the son she trusted most. The institution then made a series of decisions, efficient, instinctive, entirely characteristic, without checking what that document contained. And when it finally checked, it discovered it had a problem it could not solve with tradition. Nobody planned this. Nobody needed to. The documents did exactly what documents do. They said what they said, in writing, and waited. What this story is actually about is not inheritance law or estate valuations, or the gap between ceremonial titles and legal instruments. It is about what happens when an institution that runs on assumption meets a document that runs on precision. The monarchy has survived for centuries by trusting that its internal decisions will not be subjected to ordinary legal scrutiny. Elizabeth, whether deliberately or not, created the conditions in which one of those decisions was. The palace is not being held accountable by Edward. It is being held accountable by a piece of paper his mother signed. There is a difference, and that difference is the whole story. For 30 years, the story the palace told about Edward was a simple one. The youngest son, the quiet one, the one who dropped out of the Marines, ran a small TV company, showed up to every engagement, gave every speech, and never once made the front page for anything that mattered. The institution looked at him and saw a footnote. What the institution missed, what it was too busy watching the other fires to notice, is that Edward was the only one of the Queen's children who never stopped showing up. No scandals that shook the foundations. No wars with the press, no defections. Just a man who understood at some level that loyalty to a dying institution is its own form of power. And a mother who noticed. When Queen Elizabeth II stood at the Platinum Jubilee in June 2022 and gave her youngest son his father's title, the title Philip had carried for 73 years, the room read it as sentiment. A dying woman giving a grieving son a piece of his father. That is what it looked like from the outside. But Elizabeth had spent 70 years reading legal documents before she signed them. She had spent 70 years watching what happened when provisions were clear, and what happened when they weren't. She did not give Edward a ribbon. She gave him a legal instrument, and she knew, with the precision of someone who had run an institution through 15 prime ministers, exactly what she was doing. The legal dispute was never the story. The story was the gift, and the woman who built the gift to last. The people who love us sometimes build our protection into the fine print. Not in the speeches, not in the public gestures, in the language nobody checks until they have to, in the provisions that sit quietly inside a document for decades, waiting for the moment they're needed. Elizabeth did not announce what she had done. She did not leave a letter. She sealed her will, as every monarch before her had done, and she trusted that the documents would speak when the time came. And they did. Not loudly, not in a press conference, in a legal letter that arrived at Buckingham Palace and made the king go very quiet. That is how the people who really love us tend to operate. Not with grand declarations, with something sturdier, something that holds up in writing, something that says, I saw you, I knew what you would need, and I made sure it would be there. Edward spent 30 years being the one nobody watched. It turns out someone was watching him the whole time. One question before you go. Do you think Queen Elizabeth knew exactly what those provisions would mean when she gave Edward that title? Or did she simply give her son a gift and trust the documents to speak for themselves? Two camps, no middle ground. Tell me where you stand.